Hello, welcome to the Cozy Tea Place. We are starting a new book club. If you are in the Jane Austen sphere at all, then you likely know that there is a new film adaptation of Sense and Sensibility coming out later this year. October 16th is the US release date. I want to read Sense and Sensibility before that happens. I believe I have read it before. If so, it's been a long time. It's one of those things where I have seen the adaptation of the 1995 adaptation so many times that was written by Emma Thompson and directed by Ang Lee that it almost is like morphing into one accumulated story, and I don't know where that movie begins and the book ends. Like, I don't know where the differences are. I don't remember. And I want to have a full knowledge and understanding of the novel itself when I go into watching this new film adaptation. I love Jane Austen. I'm a lifelong lover of her work, but I do have certain books of hers and certain novels of hers that I prefer, or just that I grew such a love for that I focused on more than others. So Sense and Sensibility is one that I have not necessarily given as much attention to. The wonderful thing about Jane Austen's works, besides like everything, is that they are part of the public domain. So that means that they are accessible to everyone. They're free. You can find it online to scroll through and read if you'd like to. You can also, of course, go out and purchase a copy, or you can, go to your local library, get an audiobook. You can do whatever you want for this read along, but I just want it to be known that we don't need to worry about copyright. We don't need to worry about any of those things because it's public domain. And there are actually so many literary classics in the public domain that I kind of want to start a public domain book club. But we're going to start here. We're going to start slow. We're going to read through this chapter by chapter together. I have my copy right here. I have already read through a couple chapters, taken some notes because I want to be prepared as I read it through with you, like a read along style, but not an audiobook because I'm going to be commentating. Or if you don't know, I'm telling you right now, I will probably be pausing and making comments. And that's the point. I want it to be more of a discussion. And I hope you'll join me. But before we get into the first chunk of chapters for today, I do want to do just a little mini literary history lesson. Sense and Sensibility was Jane Austen's first published novel. It was published in 1811. I do have a couple notes here if you see me looking to the side. But she first drafted out this novel in 1795. And when she did that, the original title was Eleanor and Marianne, which, if you don't know, are the names of the two main characters, the two sisters that this novel centers around. The novel follows the lives and loves of these two sisters, one of which is ruled by sense and reason, and one is ruled by sensibility, so emotion, passion, and feeling. When this novel was published, it was released in 3 volumes, and it didn't say written by Jane Austen, it said written by a lady. And now, while the primary reason for that is patriarchy and sexism, that might be a fun thing to deep dive into at another time to get into the more complexities of it and why Jane herself would have wanted it to say by a lady. If you have never read Jane Austen, there are just a couple things I want to know. I want you to know. First of all, her novels, the themes in the narration and, things in the novel, I believe, are deceptively simple. Oh, ladies want to get married and that one has money, so I want him, and, mamas. I really do feel and believe it's all a facade for a much deeper narrative and a satirical kind of extremely smart, or not kind of, an extremely smart discourse that's going on under the surface. The amount of awareness and intelligence needed to make her novels appear to be innocent and appealing and simple, while there is a completely separate narrative to be argued for about what is going on in the world at the time. The amount of awareness for that is, wild. She was cheeky and she was brilliant. Jane Austen, if that wasn't clear. She wrote carefully and intentionally. What a woman. Maybe we can do a deep dive on Jane at some point, just in general, because she's incredible. And we actually know very little about her. So I'm basing this all on what we know about her writing and her work. The last thing that I want to mention that I do feel is important, it's a little tiny bit of a grammar lesson, but I promise I'll make it quick. Jane Austen popularized the literary technique known as free indirect discourse. This essentially blends a third-person narrative with a first-person perspective. So just a couple examples. To see how free indirect discourse functions. Direct discourse, so a different thing, is the character's exact words explicitly quoted. So this would be, Jane thought, why is it always raining? Indirect discourse is the narrator paraphrasing the character's thoughts, keeping the third person voice. So, an example would be Jane wondered why it was always raining. Free indirect discourse, what Jane uses in her novels, blurs the line. So the narrator adopts the character's voice and thoughts, but retains the third person perspective and tense. So, for example, why is it always raining? But there's no quotations. Now, there is dialogue in Jane's novels, but it's just something to be aware of going into this, that it can get confusing where the point of view switch and whose thought are we hearing right now? Whose perspective are we in right now? It's just something to think about or just be aware of. It can be hard to track, it can be hard to understand. And I've read a lot of Jane Austen, and still every time I read her novels, because I haven't studied her writing, I'm not an expert by any means, I'm just a lover. But I still get confused, and sometimes I have to backtrack, and it's normal. And we likely will do that throughout this read along. So with the free indirect discourse, plus, vocabulary that we may be familiar with that she is using in a different way because it was a different time, plus vocabulary that we may be unfamiliar with, plus, societal standards that don't apply to us today, all of that combined makes the reading experience very fun, very exciting, and it can be frustrating and confusing. It's all of that combined. It's an adventure, and we're in it together. We're on this ride together. So grab your dictionary or your thesaurus. Sometimes I find the thesaurus more helpful. I find that word very difficult to say as well. And let's get to it. Again, just want to say I'm not an expert. I may say things wrong. I might misunderstand things. This is for fun, and it's all open for discussion. I'm going to read through each chapter. We're only going to do a couple today, but after each chapter, and probably throughout, we'll have a little bit of discussion. And by that, I mean I will discuss. And at the end, I have prepared a couple like discussion questions so that if you want to also, read along and or just listen and discuss in the comments, please feel free. I would love that. The point of a book club is for the conversation. And in the future, maybe we could do lives and everything, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. You know what I mean? Okay, Sense and Sensibility. And yes, I will be holding this microphone here because I have my air conditioning on. It's warm and I need it on. So hopefully the sound is not wild. Volume 1, Chapter 1 of Sense and Sensibility. The family of Dashwood had been long settled in Sussex. Their estate was large, and their residence was at Norland Park, in the center of their property, where, for many generations, they had lived in so respectable a manner as to engage the general good opinion of their surrounding acquaintance. The last owner but one of this estate was a single man who lived to a very advanced age, and who, for many years of his life, had a constant companion and housekeeper in his sister. That's crazy. But her death, which happened 10 years before his own, produced a great alteration in his home, for, to supply her loss, he invited and received into his house the family of his nephew, Mr. Henry Dashwood, the legal inheritor of the Norland estate, and the person to whom he intended to bequeath it. So, Mr. Henry Dashwood, we will come to learn, is dad of the girlies that we are going to be getting to know. And this first chapter, the setup, the way Jane sets things up, it can get confusing. I will do my best to explain in the way that I understand. But, bear with me. It's worth it. In the society of his nephew and niece and their children, the old gentleman's days were comfortably spent. His attachment to them all increased. The constant attention of Mr. and Mrs. Henry Dashwood to his wishes, which proceeded not merely from interest, but from goodness of heart, gave him every degree of solid comfort which his age could receive, and the cheerfulness of the children added a relish to his existence. By a former marriage, Mr. Henry Dashwood had one son. By his present lady, 3 daughters. So Papa was married before, and he had one son in that marriage. Now he's married to Mama, and he has 3 daughters. And we're going to, really focus on those girlies throughout the rest of the story. The son, a steady, respectable young man, was amply provided for by the fortune of his mother, which had been large, the fortune, and half of which devolved on him in his coming of age. By his own marriage, likewise, which happened soon afterwards, he added to his wealth. His wife had something considerable at present, and something still more to expect hereafter from her mother, her only surviving parent, who had much to give. To him, therefore, the succession to the Norland estate was not so really important as to his sisters, for their fortune, independent of what might arise to them from their fathers inheriting that property, could be but small. Their mother had nothing, and their father only £7,000 in his own disposal, for the remaining moiety of his first wife's fortune was also secured to her child, and he had only a life interest in it. Okay, so they don't have a lot of money. The son does because his mom had money and his wife now has money. But the daughters from the second marriage really, really don't have much at all. And neither does Papa. The old gentleman died, the man who gave the house to Papa. His will was read, and like almost every other will, gave as much disappointment as pleasure. He was neither so unjust nor so ungrateful as to leave his estate from his nephew, but he left it to him on such terms as destroyed half the value of the bequest. Mr. Dashwood had wished for it more for the sake of his wife and daughters than for himself or his son, but to his son and his son's son, a child of 4 years old, it was secured in such a way as to leave himself no power of providing for those who were most dear to him and who most needed a provision by any division of the estate or by any sale of its valuable woods. So the way that the house was passed down to Papa, there's no way for him to directly make sure the girlies get to stay there. There's no, just the way it's set up, it's just not going to work that way. The whole was tied up for the benefit of his child, who, in occasional visits with his father and mother at Norland, had so far gained on the affection of his uncle, by such attractions as are by no means unusual in children of 2 or 3 years old, an imperfect articulation, an earnest desire of having his own way, many cunning tricks, and a great deal of noise, as to outweigh all the value of the of all the attention which, for years, he had received from his niece and her daughters. He meant not to be unkind, however, and as a mark of his affection for the three girls, he left them £1,000 apiece. Mr. Dashwood's disappointment was at first severe, but his temper was cheerful and sanguine, and he might reasonably hope to live many years, and by living economically, lay by a considerable sum from the produce of an estate already large and capable of almost immediate improvement. But the fortune which had been so tardy in coming was his only one 12-month. He survived his uncle no longer, and £10,000, including the late legacies, was all that remained for his widow and daughters. There's a lot of money in moving things around here. Also, a while back, I used the word moiety. That means part. It's probably not helpful now, but okay. So this is what I mean, like with the setups, it's a lot to keep track of, especially because society does not work this way now. And it's very confusing, and the math, and £7,000, £1,000 each, and now what is it, £10,000 total? Like, because we're talking about interest, we're talking about all these things, and it's a little wild. And to be totally honest, I'm not going to go too deep into that for myself personally. His son was sent for as soon as his danger was known, and to him Mr. Dashwood recommended, with all the strength and urgency with which illness could command, the interest of his mother-in-law and sisters. So Papa is sick, and he called his son to kind of figure out what they're going to do about the ladies. Mr. John Dashwood, this is the son, had not the strong feelings of the rest of the family, but he was affected by a recommendation of such a nature at such a time, and he promised to do everything in his power to make them comfortable. His father was rendered easy by such an assurance, and Mr. John Dashwood had then leisure to consider how much there might prudently be in his power to do for them. He was not an ill-disposed young man, unless to be rather cold-hearted and rather selfish is to be ill-disposed. Jane, please? But he was in general well respected, for he conducted himself with propriety in the discharge of his ordinary duties. Had he married a more amiable woman, he might have been made still more respectable than he was. He might even have been made amiable himself, for he was very young when he married and very fond of his wife. But Mrs. John Dashwood was a strong caricature of himself, more narrow-minded and selfish. Scathing. When he gave his promise to his father, he meditated within himself to increase the fortunes of his sisters by the present of £1,000 apiece. He then really thought himself equal to it. The prospect of £4,000 a year, in addition to his present income, besides the remaining half of his own mother's fortune, warmed his heart and made him feel capable of generosity. Yes, he would give them £3,000. It would be liberal and handsome. It would be enough to make them completely easy. £3,000! He could spare so considerable a sum with little inconvenience. He thought of it all day long and for many days successively, and he did not repent. No sooner was his father's funeral over than Mrs. John Dashwood, without sending any notice of her intention to her mother-in-law, Mamma, arrived with her child and their attendants. So Papa has passed away. The house has, been inherited by Mr. John Dashwood, and his wife. The funeral is over. She's moving in. She brought her child, she brought her servants, and she is moving in without any regard to what the current, residents of the home might feel. No one could dispute her right to come. The house was her husband's from the moment of his father's decease, but the indelicacy of her conduct was so much the greater, and to a woman in Mrs. Dashwood, mamma's situation, with only common feelings, must have been highly unpleasing. But in her mind there was a sense of honor so keen, a generosity so romantic, that any offense of the kind, by whomsoever given or received, was to her a source of immovable disgust. Mrs. John Dashwood had never been a favorite with any of her husband's family, but she had had no opportunity till the present of showing them with how little attention to the comfort of other people she could act when occasion required it. She's the worst, basically. So acutely did Mrs. Dashwood feel this ungracious behavior, and so earnestly did she despise her daughter in law for it, that on the arrival of the latter she would have quitted the house for ever, had not the entreaty of her eldest daughter induced her first to reflect on the propriety of going, and her own tender love for all her three children determined her afterwards to stay, and for their sakes avoid a breach with their brother. So the mom hates the daughter-in-law so much. She's like, this, it's so rude. They're grieving. Her husband passed away. This woman has come in and taken over the house. It's awful. And she's like, she would have left like as soon as it happened if it weren't for the eldest daughter, who we're going to meet right now, who has kind of been the voice of reason and said, we really can't, have a fight with our brother right now when we are relying upon him for everything. So Eleanor, this eldest daughter, whose advice was so effectual, possessed a strength of understanding and a coolness of judgment which qualified her, though only 19, to be the counselor of her mother, and enabled her frequently to counteract, to the advantage of them all, that eagerness of mind in Mrs. Dashwood which must generally have led to imprudence. Imprudence is foolishness or carelessness. She had an excellent heart, her disposition was affectionate, and her feelings were strong, but she knew how to govern them. It was a knowledge which her mother had yet to learn, and which one of her sisters had resolved never to be taught. Marianne's abilities were, this is the sister, were in many respects quite equal to Eleanor's. She was sensible and clever, but eager in everything. Her sorrows, her joys, could have no moderation. She was generous, amiable, interesting. She was everything but prudent, everything but careful. The resemblance between her and her mother was strikingly great. Now, this line is so interesting to me because I think at the time it could have very well meant physically, resemblance, like a physical resemblance, how they look, but I think that it very much has to do with personality as well. Eleanor saw with concern the excess of her sister's sensibility, but by Mrs. Dashwood it was valued and cherished. Mom and Marianne are very similar, and they very much value feeling and their passion. They encouraged each other now in the violence of their affliction. The agony of grief which overpowered them at first was voluntarily renewed, was sought for, was created again and again. They gave themselves up wholly to their sorrow, seeking increase of wretchedness in every reflection that could afford it, and resolved against ever admitting consolation in the future. Eleanor, too, was deeply afflicted, but still she could struggle, she could exert herself, she could consult with her brother, could receive her sister-in-law on her arrival, and treat her with every proper attention, and could strive to rouse her mother to similar exertion and encourage her to similar forbearance. Margaret, the other sister, was a good-humored, well-disposed girl, but as she had already imbibed a good deal of Marianne's romance, within having much of her sense, she did not, at 13, bid fair to equal her sisters at a more advanced period of life. That's the end of chapter 1. Eleanor is such an eldest daughter. My God. Okay, so I have my notes here. I can't lie. Anytime I read Austen, the first couple chapters always confuse me with, the setup and money and so and so and so and so and Mrs. Dashwood, Mrs. John Dashwood, Mr. Dashwood, Mr. John Dashwood. It can be really confusing to keep up with these characters, and I will do my very best to establish who is who as we go through. So, a quick rundown: we met the family. They live at Norland Park. Papa passes away. The house, goes to the son, and his wife moves in, and he moves in, but his wife's like, we're getting there right now. Mama, Mrs. Dashwood, and the daughters, Eleanor, Marianne, and Margaret, are deeply affected by this. They are deeply grieving. They are in a really bad way. They've lost everything. Their father and their husband was their stability. That is gone, and these people are just coming in and taking over, and they already don't like her, Mrs. John Dashwood, the son's wife. who will come to know her name as Fanny. So the son did promise the father that he will take care of the women that he loved so much. So we'll see what happens. A couple discussion questions or just things to ponder on for chapter 1. How do you feel about the family tree dump that we get in the early chapters of Austen? It almost reminds me of more modern day fantasy novels where you get a little bit of like an info dump, a lore dump. I don't know why I keep saying dump, but you know what I mean. It is pretty succinct considering how much she packs into the like what 4 or 5 pages tops that there is in chapter 1. It's pretty succinct and understandable considering, but because it is in such a language and phrasing and in such a society that we are unfamiliar with, it can get confusing. So what are your thoughts on that? The other thing is that this story would have absolutely no legs if women weren't restricted as much as they were in this time. Are you familiar with the rules, the customs, the societal norms of Austen's time? If this novel was written today, taking place in the same time, so if it was written by an author from modern day, taking place in like 1811 when it was published, or 1795 when it was first drafted, what sort of flexibility do you think that an author would create within the story? Because Austen only knew what she knew. She was confined to the time. She does amazing work within those boundaries that she had to. That's all she knew. She knew it wasn't necessarily right. She knew it was unjust, but that's what her world was. So if somebody was writing it today, setting up in the same way. I've read historical romances and period novels today that takes so many more liberties with what's possible because we just have that knowledge now. So where do you think an author would take it now? Like how would they be flexible with the story? And do you think it would take away from it? Take a tea break. We're going to get into chapter 2. I like to think of this chapter as manipulation via monetary debate, and you'll see why. Mrs. John Dashwood. I wrote ew next to her name. Mrs. John Dashwood now installed herself mistress of Norland, and her mother and sisters in law were degraded to the conditions of visitors. They've lived there almost their whole lives, or a long, long time, and now they're guests in their own home. As such, however, they were treated by her with quiet civility and by her husband with as much kindness as he could feel towards anybody beyond himself, his wife, and their child. He really pressed them with some earnestness to consider Norland as their home, and as no plan appeared so eligible to Mrs. Dashwood as remaining there till she could accommodate herself with a house in the neighborhood, his invitation was accepted. A continuance in a place where everything reminded her of former delight was exactly what suited her mind. In seasons of cheerfulness, no temper could be more cheerful than hers, or possess in a greater degree that sanguine expectation of happiness which is happiness itself. Oh, I was trying to figure out what I wrote. So sanguine is another word for like enthusiastic. But in sorrow she must be equally carried away by her fancy, and as far beyond consolation as in pleasure she was beyond alloy. Mrs. John Dashwood did not at all approve of what her husband intended to do for his sisters. To take £3,000 from the fortune of their dear little boy would be impoverishing him to the most dreadful degree. She begged him to think again on the subject. How could he answer it to himself? How could he answer it to himself to rob his child, and his only child, too, of so large a sum? And what possible claim could the Miss Dashwoods, who were related to him by only half blood, which she considered as no relationship at all, King Voldemort, have only his generosity to so large an amount? It was very well known that no affection was ever supposed to exist between the children of any man by different marriages, and why was he to ruin himself and their poor little Henry by giving away all his money to his half sisters? It was my father's last request to me, replied her husband, that I should assist his widows and daughters. He did not know what he was thinking, what he was talking of, I dare say. 10 to 1, but he was light-headed at the time. Had he been in his right senses, he could not have thought of such a thing as begging you to give away half your fortune from your child. He did not stipulate for any particular sum, my dear Fanny. He only requested me, in general terms, to assist them and make their situation more comfortable than it was in his power to do. Perhaps it would have been as well if he had left it wholly to myself. He could hardly suppose I should neglect them, but as he required the promise, I could not do less than give it. At least I thought so at the time. The promise, therefore, was given and must be performed. Something must be done for them whenever they leave Norland and settle in a new home. Well, then let something be done for them, but that something need not be £3,000. Consider, she added, that when the money is once parted with, it can never return. Your sisters will marry, and it will be gone forever, if indeed it could ever be restored to our poor little boy. Why, to be sure, said her husband very gravely, that would make a great difference. The time may come when have I been saying Henry? Because it's Harry. So sorry. Their son's name is Harry. My bad. Is there like a typo? Why do I keep doing that? Let's go back. Why, to be sure, said her husband very gravely, that would make a great difference. The time may come when Harry will regret that so large a sum was parted with. If he should have a numerous family, for instance, it would be a very convenient addition. To be sure, it would. Perhaps then it would be better for all parties if the sum were diminished one half. £500 would be a prodigious increase to their fortunes. Oh, beyond anything great. What brother on earth would do half so much for his sisters, even if really his sisters, and as it is only half blood? But you have such a generous spirit. I would not wish to do anything mean, he replied. One had rather, on such occasions, do too much than too little. No one, at least, can think I have not done enough for them. Even themselves, they can hardly expect more. There is no knowing what they may expect, said the lady, but we are not to think of their expectations. The question is, what can you afford to do? What you can afford to do. Certainly, and I think I may afford to give them £500 apiece. As it is, without any addition of mine, they will each have above £3,000 on their mother's death, a very comfortable fortune for any young woman. To be sure it is, and indeed it strikes me that they can want no addition at all. They will have £10,000 divided amongst them. If they marry, they will be sure of doing well, and if they do not, they may all live very comfortably together on the interest of £10,000. That is very true, and therefore I do not know whether, upon the whole, it would not be more advisable to do something for their mother while she lives, rather than for them, something of the annuity kind, I mean. My sisters would feel the good effects of it, as well as herself. 100 a year would make them all perfectly comfortable. Notice how the number keeps dwindling. His wife hesitated a little, however, in giving her consent to this plan. To be sure, she said, it is better than parting with £1,500 at once, but then if Mrs. Dashwood should live 15 years, we shall be completely taken in. 15 years! My dear Fanny, her life cannot be worth half that purchase. Certainly not, but if you observe, people always live forever when there is an annuity to be paid to them, and she is very stout and healthy, for hardly 40. She's hardly 40 years old. An annuity is very serious business and comes over and over every year, and there's no getting rid of it. You are not aware of what you're doing. I have known a great deal of the trouble of annuities, for my mother was clogged with the payment of three to old superannuated servants by my father's will, and it is amazing how disagreeable she found it. Twice every year these annuities were to be paid, and there was the trouble of getting it to them, and then one of them was said to have died, and afterwards it turned out to be no such thing. My mother was quite sick of it. Her income was not her own, she said, with such perpetual claims on it. And it was more unkind in my father, because otherwise the money would have been entirely at my mother's disposal without any restrictions whatever. Oh, whatever. It has given me such an abhorrence of annuities that I am sure I would not pin myself down to the payment of one for all the world. It is certainly an unpleasant thing, replied Mr. Dashwood, to have those kind of yearly drains to one's income. One's fortune, as your mother justly says, is not one's own. To be tied down to the regular payment of such a sum on every rent day is by no means desirable. It takes away one's independence. Now, I do want to note in this little part here, we are referring to Mr. John Dashwood as Mr. Dashwood, and that is because he is now Mr. Dashwood because his father is passed. He no longer needs to be referred to with his first name because he is him. He is Mr. Dashwood. Now, undoubtedly. And after all, you have no thanks for it. They think themselves secure. You do no more than what is expected, and it raises no gratitude at all. If I were you, whatever I did should be done at my own discretion entirely. I would not bind myself to allow them anything yearly. It may be very inconvenient some years to spare 100 or even £50 from our own expenses. That's Fanny again. This is Mr. Dashwood again. I believe you are right, my love. It will be better that there should be no annuity in the case. Whatever I may give them occasionally will be far greater assistance than a yearly allowance, because they would only enlarge their style of living if they felt sure of a larger income, and would not be sixpence the richer for it at the end of the year. They suck. It will certainly be much the best way. A present of £50 now and then occasionally, will prevent their ever being distressed for money, and will, I think, be amply discharging my promise to my father. So we've gone from what, £3,000 total to 1,500 total, 500 apiece, to 100 or whatever, and now like 50 occasionally total. This is Fanny now. To be sure, it will. Indeed, to say the truth, I am convinced within myself that your father had no idea of your giving them any money at all. The assistance he thought of, I dare say, was only such as might be reasonably expected of you. For instance, such as looking out for a comfortable small house for them, helping them to move their things, and sending them presents of fish and game and so forth whenever they are in season. I'll lay my life that he meant nothing further. Indeed, it would be very strange and unreasonable if he did. Do but consider, my dear Mr. Dashwood, how excessively comfortable your mother-in-law and her daughters may live on the interest of £7,000, besides the £1,000 belonging to each of the girls, which brings them in £50 a year apiece, and of course they will pay their mother for their board out of it. Excuse me. Altogether, they will have 500 a year amongst them, and what on earth can four women want for more than that? They will live so cheap. Their housekeeping will be nothing at all. They will have no carriage, no horses, and hardly any servants. They will keep no company and can have no expenses of any kind. Only conceive how comfortable they'll be. 500 a year. Only conceive oh, sorry, I'm repeating myself now. I am sure I cannot imagine how they will spend half of it. And as to your giving them more, it is quite absurd to think of it. They will be much more able to give you something. This woman, oh my God, this woman is infuriating. Upon my word, said Mr. Dashwood, I believe you are perfectly right. My father certainly could mean nothing more by his request to me than what you say. I clearly understand it now, and I will strictly fulfill my engagement by such acts of assistance and kindness to them as you have described, like, moving their things. When my mother removes into another house, my services shall be readily given to accommodate her as far as I can. Some little present of furniture, too, may be acceptable then. Certainly, returned Mrs. John Dashwood, but, however, one thing must be considered. Oh, just pause. Fanny is still considered Mrs. John Dashwood because mom is still alive. Mrs. Dashwood. She's still Mrs. Dashwood, so Fanny is still considered Mrs. John Dashwood. It's all a thing. So certainly, returned Mrs. John Dashwood, but however, one thing must be considered. When your father and mother moved to Norland, though the furniture of Stanhill was sold, all the china, plate, and linen was saved, and is now left to your mother. Her house will therefore be almost completely fitted up as soon as she takes it. That is a material consideration, undoubtedly, a valuable legacy indeed, and yet some of the plate would have been a very pleasant addition to our own stock here. They're literally talking about taking their stuff for themselves. I mean, they won't and they can't, but like, what? Yes, and the set of breakfast china is twice as handsome as what belongs to this house, a great deal too handsome, in my opinion, for any place they can ever afford to live in. But, however, so it is. Your father thought only of them, and I must say this, that you owe no particular gratitude to him, nor attention to his wishes, for we very well know that if he could, he would have left almost everything in the world to them. This argument was irresistible. It gave to his intentions whatever of decision was wanting before, and he finally resolved that it would be absolutely unnecessary, if not highly indecorous, to do more for the widow and children of his father than such kind of neighborly acts as his own wife pointed out. She is a master manipulator, and he is an absolute dingus. I just have my notes pulled up here now. Austen really nails a description of them in chapter 1. If you remember, it was basically saying that Mr. John Dashwood is meh, and he can be cold, but he's kind of like whatever. And then it says that she is, a worse version of him, basically. He clearly has no spine, and that's why, he likes her, and that's why she likes him. That's why they're married. It's bonkers. Every sentence, they minimize the amount of money they decide to give these women until it's literally nothing. Until it's literally a favor. Again, this is a whole setup for the entire story, but still, it's so infuriating. With how easily manipulated John is, it makes me think about his upbringing. His father seemed like he was decent. Like Mr. Dashwood seems like he was decent. He at the very least really loved his wife and daughters. So we can presume he loved his son. But we know that Mr. John Dashwood's mother was really wealthy. He doesn't seem to hold any malevolence towards his stepmother, Mrs. Dashwood, or the sisters, Eleanor, Marianne, and Margaret. So he's just a dummy. Like, do you think this is Austen making a statement about a man growing up privileged at the time? Or do you think that, it's just a character? I don't know. I was just reading through it and I was like, what made this man this way? He's so different than the sisters. And, they're half siblings, as Fanny would point out, but still, like, they have the same father. And it's just really interesting. It's really interesting, which this all made me think of. And these are the discussion points if you'd like to comment on it down below. But it also made me think, likewise, that Fanny is the worst, but it could be framed that she's a woman that's grown up in a world where women have control over absolutely nothing. And therefore, she controls her husband and her husband's money. And she can, because he's a dingus, he's a doofus. So forget being a girl's girl, I guess. It can be painted and portrayed that she's doing what she has to do to protect her son. It doesn't make her less of a terrible person. um, but I would love to know your thoughts on those things down below, about what their upbringings could have possibly been, what made these people who they are, and how Austen is using them to form a world, really. Okay, pause, take a tea break, go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do. Although I guess you could listen to this while you're doing all of those things, but I needed to pause just for a second. We are going to do one more chapter for this episode of our read along, our book club. I hope you're enjoying it. Let me know down below. I'm having the best time. So, one more chapter is going to be chapter 3 in volume 1. And here, well, I won't give away, I won't say anything. I'm not going to say anything. We'll talk about it after. So, chapter 3. Mrs. Dashwood remained at Norland several months, not from any disinclination to move when the sight of every well-known spot ceased to raise the violent emotion which it produced for a while, for when her spirits began to revive, and her mind became capable of some other exertion than that of heightening its affliction by melancholy remembrances, she was impatient to be gone, and indefatigable, relentless in her inquiries for a suitable dwelling in the neighborhood of Norland. For to remove so far from that beloved spot was impossible, but she could hear of no situation that at once answered her notions of comfort and ease, and suited the prudence of her eldest daughter, whose steadier judgment rejected several houses as too large for their income, which her mother would have approved. So Mrs. Dashwood is trying to get out of the house. She would love to get out of the house, but she wants to stay close. She loves Norland. She wants to stay close, and she, I think, still feels that it's rightfully hers, which is fair. But Eleanor has turned down every single house that she's essentially looked at because they're too expensive. Mrs. Dashwood, here's some tea, had been informed by her husband of the solemn promise on the part of his son in their favor, which gave comfort to his last earthly reflections. She doubted the sincerity of this assurance no more than he had doubted it himself, and she thought of it for her daughter's sake with satisfaction, though as for herself she was persuaded that a much smaller provision than £7,000 would support her in affluence. For their brother's sake, too, for the sake of his own heart, she rejoiced, and she reproached herself for being unjust to his merit before, and believing him incapable of generosity. So Mrs. Dashwood knows that they're supposed to get money from John, because Mr. Dashwood told her that he made John promise. His attentive behavior to herself and his sisters convinced her that their welfare was dear to him, and for a long time she firmly relied on the liberality of his intentions. So Mrs. Dashwood, she's just very much banking on the fact that John is going to take care of them. He's being nice. He's letting them stay there. So she's like, he'll take care of us. He's going to keep his promise. The contempt which she had very early in their acquaintance felt for her daughter-in-law, Fanny, was very much increased by the farther knowledge of her character, which half a year's residence in her family afforded. They've been there for 6 months. And perhaps in spite of every consideration of politeness or maternal affection on the side of the former, the two ladies might have found it impossible to have lived together so long, had not a particular circumstance occurred to give still greater eligibility, according to the opinions of Mrs. Dashwood, to her daughter's continuance at Norland. This circumstance was a growing attachment between her eldest daughter, Eleanor, and the brother of Mrs. John Dashwood, a gentlemanlike and pleasing young man who was introduced to their acquaintance soon after his sister's establishment at Norland, and who had since spent the greatest part of his time there. Fanny has a brother, and him and Eleanor are yapping. Uh, some mothers might have encouraged the intimacy from motives of interest, for Edward Ferrars, this is Fanny's brother, was the eldest son of a man who had died very rich, and some might have repressed it from motives of prudence, for, except a trifling sum, the whole of his fortune depended on the will of his mother. So he has no access to his money because it all belongs to his mom. But Mrs. Dashwood was alike uninfluenced by either consideration. It was enough for her that he appeared to be amiable, that he loved her daughter, and that Eleanor returned the partiality. It was contrary to every doctrine of hers that difference of fortune should keep any couple asunder who were attracted by resemblance of disposition, and that Eleanor's merit should not be acknowledged by everyone who knew her was to her comprehension impossible. So, Mrs. Dashwood, mom, knows that, Edward doesn't have access to his money, knows that Eleanor has no money, knows that, the logic is there, but she's just kind of like, whatever. Like, they're in love, it doesn't matter, which is a romantic notion. It is her sensibility. Edward Ferrars was not recommended to their good opinion by any peculiar graces of person or address. He was not handsome, and his manners required intimacy to make them pleasing. He's an awkward boy. He was too diffident or humble to do justice to himself, but when his natural shyness was overcome, his behavior gave every indication of an open, affectionate heart. His understanding was good, and his education had given it solid improvement, but he was neither fitted by abilities nor disposition to answer the wishes of his mother and sister, who longed to see him distinguished as they hardly knew what. They wanted him to make a fine figure in the world in some manner or other. His mother wished to interest him in political concerns, to get him into parliament, or to see him connected with some of the great men of the day. Mrs. John Dashwood, Fanny, wished it likewise, but in the meanwhile, till one of those superior blessings could be attained, it would have quieted her ambition to see him drawing a barouche, a fancy carriage. But Edward had no turn for great men or barouches. All his wishes centered in domestic comfort and the quiet of private life. Fortunately, he had a younger brother who was much more promising. Edward had been staying several weeks in the house before he engaged much of Mrs. Dashwood's attention, so Mom's attention, for she was at the time in such affliction as rendered her careless of surrounding objects. She saw only that he was quiet and unobtrusive, and she liked him for it. He did not disturb the wretchedness of her mind by ill-timed conversation. She was first called to observe and approve him farther by a reflection which Eleanor chanced one day to make on the difference between him and his sister. It was a contrast which recommended him most forcibly to her mother. "It is enough," said she, "to say that he is unlike Fanny is enough. It implies everything amiable. I love him already." Mom's just like, he's nothing like Fanny. I love him. Oh my God. "I think you will like him," said Eleanor, "when you know more of him." "Like him," replied her mother with a smile. "I can feel no sentiment of approbation inferior to love. You may esteem him," and by that she means you might not just like him, you might respect him. "I have never yet known what it was to separate esteem and love." Mrs. Dashwood now took pains to get acquainted with him. Her manners were attaching, and soon banished his reserve. She speedily comprehended all his merits. The persuasion of his regard for Eleanor perhaps assisted her penetration, but she really felt assured of his worth, and even that quietness of manner which militated against all her established ideas of what a young man's address ought to be was no longer uninteresting when she knew his heart to be warm and his temper affectionate. No sooner did she perceive any symptom of love in his behavior to Eleanor than she considered their serious attachment as certain, and looked forward to their marriage as rapidly approaching. "In a few months, my dear Marianne," said she, "Eleanor will in all probability be settled for life. We shall miss her, but she will be happy." "Oh, mamma, how shall we do without her?" My love, it will be scarcely a separation. We shall live within a few miles of each other and shall meet every day of our lives. You will gain a brother, a real, affectionate brother. I have the highest opinion in the world of Edward's heart, but you look grave, Marianne. Do you disapprove of your sister's choice? Really interesting little dig at Mr. John Dashwood in that paragraph there. She's like, you'll gain a brother, a real, affectionate brother. She hates them. So she said, but you look grave, Marianne. Do you disapprove of your sister's choice? Perhaps, said Marianne, I may consider it with some surprise. Edward is very amiable, and I love him tenderly, but yet he is not the kind of young man. There is a something wanting. His figure is not striking. It is none of that grace which I should expect the man who could seriously attach my sister. This is interesting too. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. It has none of that grace which I should expect in the man who could seriously attach my sister. I don't think this statement is about Eleanor. I think she's saying it like my sister. Like my sister couldn't fall for him. Not that Eleanor couldn't fall for him, just like somebody that's associated with me. Like that's how I'm interpreting it. His eyes want all that spirit, that fire, which at once announced virtue and intelligence. And besides all this, I am afraid, mamma, that he has no real taste. Music seems scarcely to attract him, and though he admires Eleanor's drawings very much, I lost my place. It is not the admiration of a person who can understand their worth. It is evident, in spite of his frequent attention to her while she draws, that in fact he knows nothing of the matter. He admires as a lover, not as a connoisseur. To satisfy me, those characters must be united. I could not be happy with a man whose taste did not at every point coincide with my own. He must enter into all my feelings. Oh, the same books, the same music must charm us both. Oh, mamma, how spiritless, how tame was Edward's manner in reading to us last night. I felt for my sister most severely, yet she bore it with so much composure, she seemed scarcely to notice it. I could hardly keep my seat. To hear those beautiful lines, which have frequently almost driven me wild, pronounced with such impenetrable calmness, such dreadful indifference. He would certainly have done more justice to simple and elegant prose, I thought so at the time, but you would give him Cowper. That's mamma interrupting Marianne. And now Marianne says, nay, mamma, if he is not to be animated by Cowper, but we must allow for difference of taste. Eleanor has not my feelings, and therefore she may overlook it and be happy with him. But it would have broken my heart had I loved him to hear him read with so little sensibility. Mamma, the more I know of the world, the more I am convinced that I shall never see a man whom I can really love. I require so much. He must have all Edward's virtues, and his person and manners must ornament his goodness with every possible charm. Remember, my love, that you are not 17, so she's not even 17 yet. It is yet too early in life to despair of such a happiness. Why should you be less fortunate than your mother? In one circumstance only, my Marianne, may your destiny be different from hers. And that is the end of chapter 3. How delightful. We get our first dialogue between Mama and Marianne. Hilarious. They're just so funny. And in this chapter, we meet Edward, one of Austen's heroes, the absolute love bug, gentle man, who is the brother of Fanny. They are very, very different. Does this make Eleanor and him siblings in law, by the way? I don't know. That's not one of the discussion questions. It just occurred to me when I was writing my notes. We find out first that Mama knew the papa, so Mrs. Dashwood knows that Mr. Dashwood made John Dashwood promise to take care of the girlies, and it's not her place to bring it up. So, like, just for context, it's not even a thought. It's not even brought up in the book for Mrs. Dashwood to broach the topic with Mr. John Dashwood, because that would be like it just would be so improper and out of line and inappropriate. It's not even considered. Like, it's not even a thought that would cross her mind. It's his place as the man in charge and whatever of the money to take care of that. And she can't bring that up with him. But anyway, it's all okay because she's distracted by the fact that Edward and Eleanor are really getting along for the 6 months that they've been in the house, because she's losing her mind. And it's almost like she's like keeping herself sane by really hyper fixating and thinking about Edward and Eleanor. We also get our first insight into Mom's perspective here, and we really see the sensibility in her personality that was mentioned in chapter 1, the thing that she is very much in common with Marianne and Margaret. And we see this between Mom and Marianne in this chapter as well. She is automatically focused on that Edward is kind and that they're in love without any consideration for the logical and very valid circumstances that may keep them apart. We hear Marianne's thoughts on Eleanor and Edward as well, and she can't even understand what Eleanor finds attractive in him. Because he's not outwardly passionate at all, and that's, the point. That's like what she would need in order to believe that Edward is worthy of her or Eleanor's love, that he is capable of these big emotions and of reading this poetry with such animation. Like, she needs that in a person to think that they have any sort of taste, if you will. I also love that we get insight that mom really likes Edward at first because he doesn't bother her, because he has like a level of awareness and respect and politeness. Like, she's like, oh, he's not bothering me when I'm grieving, and he's considerate by not being a jerk. I love him. Like, because Fanny is so terrible. The bar is so low in this household. We also learned that Edward essentially has no access to his family fortune unless he does as his mother wishes. And she wants him to be someone other than who he is, essentially. Something else I wanted to note on this chapter before we go is that Austen is incredibly sharp. And the more I read her work, and let me know if you notice this as we, make our way through, the more I find myself being able to read characters from two lenses, or multiple lenses, if you will. She's either laughing at them, often lovingly, like with Marianne and Mama in that chapter. Like, we love them. We're going to love them. They're meant to be loved and beloved, but we're laughing at them. They're a little ridiculous, or the conversation was a little ridiculous. Or Austen is absolutely tearing someone apart in a somewhat appropriate way, like in a way that makes it acceptable. These like seething insults about Mr. John Dashwood and Fanny, make it very clear who they are and what their character is, but she can't. You have to say it in a certain way. There's layers to what she's saying. There seems to be always some other commentary going on under the surface. Some characters are spared at some moments. I don't really totally have my finger put down on what I'm trying to say, and I'm hoping we'll figure it out more as we go through the novel. This happens throughout all of her novels, all of the books that I've read. It just feels like there's so many layers to how a character is perceived. It's almost like you're getting what your perception is, plus what Austen's perception is, plus what characters within the novel's perception is of other characters. And all of those things at once tell a different story. And it's fascinating. Let me know if you get the same feeling, if you know what I mean. Mama and Marianne are portrayed so clearly here. We get an immediate snapshot of what they are like as people, through barely any perspective work and very, very little dialogue. Like, how does Jane do that? How does Austen do that? Do you think that Austen was laughing at them in this moment in a loving way? She must have been. I was giggling, like a little giggle for these people who are so real and relatable, that she is portraying so beautifully and succinctly. She's amazing. The last thing is that we also get a tiny peek into how Marianne thinks of Eleanor, which may not be very much at all. We haven't necessarily met Eleanor yet. We haven't had dialogue with her yet. So it's interesting that we see her through Marianne's perspective first, or Mama's as well. But, I feel like we're getting insight at least to how Marianne thinks of her. And we know that Marianne is given and Mama are given to flights of fancy. So it's like, is this a reliable depiction of Eleanor? I kind of think not. I think that Marianne, not in a bad way, but she's so young. She's so passionate. I feel like she's selfish. Like, she's just looking through her own lens, as opposed to thinking of what is actually best for Eleanor. And so my question for discussion for this chapter is, do you think that Marianne has a clear perspective of her sister, or is this more evidence to support her sensibility? I guess I kind of just answered what I thought about this, but but I would love to know what you think down below. Thank you so much for reading through these first 3 chapters with me. I cannot wait to come back and do the next couple. I don't know how many we'll do each video. I'm probably just going to go by time, to be honest, by how long it's going to take. I'm really excited for this adventure. I love Jane Austen. I love these characters. And thank you for being here. Let me know also if this is your first time reading through Austen. And yeah, can't wait. I'll see you next time. Mwah!